This edition of MacVoices is supported by you, our viewers and listeners, through our new Patreon campaign. If you get value from MacVoices, please consider helping support the show by visiting patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, once in a while something happens that's not Apple specific, but is sort of on the Apple periphery or is definitely something I'm interested in. And we like to talk about it, review it, figure out what it might mean and how it might affect us. The situation I'm talking about right now is the one where Sirius XM has purchased or entered into an agreement to purchase Pandora, which was one of my favorite music streaming services. And we'll get into that in a little while. But this deal seemed to be very interesting, and so I ask the one guy I want to call whenever there's something business-related and get his take on it, because he kind of has his thumb on the heartbeat of some of these things, is Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark, welcome. It's good to see you.
Chuck, as always, it's great to be with you, and I'm glad some of my unique points of view have not scared away you or your audience. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think I made you sound like a surgeon there. So, first of all, let's just talk a little bit about Pandora. I have a bit of a soft spot for Pandora because the founder, Tim Westergren, has been on the show a few times.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, way back. But having said that, up until the last time I used Pandora, which was admittedly a couple months ago, I still think that they had the best music discovery system out there. If I've selected a track, an artist, whatever I used to seed a station, it would play more things that I would become interested in later than Apple Music, Spotify, any of the others. And so I've always kind of gravitated back. If I just want a mix of some kind, I'll go back to Pandora as opposed to any of the other options. So when it was announced that Sirius, of all people, was picking them up, I was quite surprised. How about you?
At first, I was surprised and didn't know quite what to think about it, because I always thought of Sirius as one of the survivors of, it was Sirius and somebody else, right? It was XM and Sirius that merged and created Sirius XM. Clever branding and naming there. But looking at it at first, I was thinking, okay, maybe this is all about distribution and trying to get away from just a reliance on satellites into internet. But we'll unveil this and dig into this onion as things evolve. But at first, I did what I always did, went and looked to see how did Wall Street respond, and I didn't look in the stock market because I learned about it after the market had closed on Monday. Tuesday, I went and looked and saw that Sirius had a little bit of run up, and Pandora had a run up and came back down, and Sirius dropped. And if you look into it, Sirius collapsed about 10%, which is about the dilution that they would suffer because they're going to be issuing new shares to acquire Pandora. And sort of interestingly, it's they're going to issue $3.5 billion of stock, and the market knocked $3.2 billion of stock off of Sirius's valuation. So I think ho-hum, all of a sudden they decide, okay, well, you're spending $300 billion, to net stock to acquire an asset of who knows what it's worth. So like you, I had known Pandora. I tried it years ago on my iPhone. I don't think their app was available right away. So maybe this was 2009, 2010 when it first became available. I ultimately didn't stick with it because for the sort of music I like listening to, they didn't seem to have much, of a collection. And it just seemed, even with limited collection, after an hour or two, there wasn't a lot of other discovery and mix up. So ho-hum, why bother? But if we look at it now, my wife is a Pandora user and she loves it. and we'll come back to some of her experiences with it. So I think, as you said, there's a lot of people out there who are using it. The downside is that as a company, it's not necessarily one of the best jewels out there. And the reason I say this is, although they have a fairly large base of users, as a corporation, if we look at, does it create profits or losses? Because we're a capitalist economy. Ultimately, that's how score is kept. They're doing a horrible job. They lost last year. They lost $492 million. And in the first 6 months of their fiscal year this year, they lost $221 million. So, from a financial standpoint, they're an emergency. They're a basket case. It turns out that a little over a year ago, Sirius made an investment acquiring, I believe, on the order of 18%. It's complicated because they had a mixture of Sirius preferred shares as well as common shares. May be as high as 19%. Which would be significant because at 20% they would have to roll up Sirius's. They have to roll up Pandora's losses into theirs, on a pro rata basis, and that just would be icky because there's a lot of losses to go around. So when I look at Pandora, yes, they have a customer base. They've actually been able to grow year on year, their number of paying users. They've been able to increase the share of paying users. They have two categories, $4.99 and $9.99 a month. So you have like 3 years of history of increasing the average revenue per user. All these are good metrics, but as a whole, it's it's a disgusting mess because it has so much losses. And looking at it, two of the lines on their income statement stand out. One is the amount they're spending on SG&A, sales, general, and administration, and also the amount they're spending on R&D. And it's huge. I think from memory, and this may be wrong if it is, pardon me, I think they're spending about $250 million a year on R&D, and that's an enormous amount. That equates to like 500 engineers, sort of using Valley benchmark of 5 engineers per $1 million spent. No, sorry, that's 1,250 engineers. And just given the seeming staticness in their product and services, it just doesn't seem to stack up. Just like Twitter, also spends an enormous amount on R&D, and we wonder what the hell these people are doing because the product doesn't seem to change. So I can't help but think that Sirius, if you look at it as a company, it does last year about $1.5 billion in revenue. It generated a little over $500 million in profit. So it's a very successful company. If you look back at some of its legacy, it was born of the merger of the two satellite radio pioneers, Sirius and XM, and both of them seemed to hit a wall, or one around 6, one around 7 million customers. So they merged, and now they have an established business. It doesn't look like it's growing much, but certainly throwing off a lot of cash. So on one hand, you think, okay, Sirius XM, you better get ready. All your profits are going to be sucked up by their losses. But I don't think that's what they have in mind. I think that they maybe have some interesting bets of, some other things they can do more deeply than the sort of synergies that right now, as I mentioned, my wife uses Pandora. She says they're running ads all the time offering free trial subscriptions to the Sirius service. So, I think there's more involved than just ability to joint and co-market. What does that say to you? Do you see, for all the amount of money they're spending on R&D, do you see dramatic improvements in the quality of their service or the type of their service?
Let me address that with what I know about Pandora as it was and what I don't know about Pandora as it is. At the when Pandora started out, there was the basis of their service was the Music Genome Project, where a dedicated, trained individual would take a piece, and I mean a piece, a track, not an album, but a track, and would go through it and analyze it and categorize it in I don't even know how many different ways, so that it wasn't just a case of, okay, this is classical, or this is pop, or this is metal. It was a lot more involved than that. And as a result, I thought they were giving a better product because of the recommendations. Because if I, just to throw a wild example, if I seated a station with the Beatles, I might get something by Jimi Hendrix, but completely different kinds of artists. But there was definitely a connection. You could tell, and that's what I loved about it. I found a lot of artists through Pandora by doing exactly that, things that I didn't know I liked or had never heard of, and really did enjoy. But that had to be a labor-intensive process, and that makes me wonder if that's some of where I don't know how you would categorize that necessarily, whether that's operating or R&D, to keep adding things in. Because the disadvantage to it was, and again, this is the way it was. There may be machine learning involved and AI involved now to speed the process up. But if the latest album dropped from artist X, they didn't just put it into rotation, in an hour. They went through. They would do their process, and then it would pop up the way it should be. So as a result, you couldn't, and of course the other disadvantage always was for them that if I wanted to hear the Beatles, I couldn't just go and play the Beatles. I could hear maybe 1-2 tracks, but then it was going to feed me other things like that. The other thing I know about it, because I've tried to follow Pandora through the years. Not long ago, and I'll say not long ago, a few months maybe, they introduced or were talking about doing something they were calling the Podcast Genome Project, which would have been, I presume, a similar process to discover podcasts, which would have been nice for this operation. So again, I have to wonder how much research and development went into that, and what kind of critical mass they felt they needed before they could take that and make it a viable product. If you use the free version, I agree with your wife. It feels like a lot more ads than there used to be, and obviously a lot more free subscription things. I look at the way Pandora penetrated. Because I still know a number of people that stream an awful lot of music because they use Pandora in the car. Mm-hmm. That was one of the first alternatives to music streaming, or to some of the more traditional ways of taking music in a car. So that's why I guess I'm sorry to see this happen, but I also can see that at least based on the way I understood their model from a few years ago, it would be a very cost-intensive thing to keep that up.
Another thing I think Pandora has on its favor, and everyone's going to hate this because it drives to advertising, and I think if you read their 8K or 10K, they point out a lot of benefits that they have in terms of targeting some very large number, couple thousand different sort of demographic subsets. So as an advertising vehicle, I think they are actually quite good. And my wife's experience is, depending on the sort of music she'll listen to, she'll sort of see a change in the type of advertising that is served up. So that tells me that they have quite a very responsive system. And I would imagine that is something, if it is robust and modular, would be something of great interest to Sirius, to being able to help better target and help them increase their advertising. I think that as much as Pandora may be a great first mover, that has sort of hit a wall. I think Sirius XM has successfully evolved through a number of changes in terms of how music is distributed, in terms of how people listen. And just doing a quick read of Sirius's 10K report, and interesting. How could this be anything except real? Its ticker for trading is SIRI, which is our good old friend Siri. So so I'll just call it Siri from now on. So the way Siri, or Sirius XM, let's do it that way. They're announcing that they have plans in 2018 to try to unify people's listening experience between broadcast as well as over the internet. So it looks like they're betting heavily on next generation of making things more discoverable, because I think the bane of having such large music libraries available through, name it, Pandora, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, is discoverability is a huge problem. And it seems like that's some of the core of the technology strengths that Pandora brings into this mix. So I think ultimately this is a bet on the vision of the future that the management team at Sirius XM has. And it's never fun to see a company sort of hit the wall, but if companies can't generate profits, they either get acquired or they crash and go out of business.
Our friends over at the Next Track, Doug and Kirk,
Yep.
I'm anxious to hear what their take will be on this, simply because one of the focuses of their show is how people listen to music today. The operative word being today. And Pandora came along. I mean, for the folks that didn't know what it is or didn't pay attention, it was probably the first music streaming service that got any kind of widespread attention or distribution, long before Spotify, long before Apple Music. And it was based on discoverability. You fed it something that you gave it an idea of what you liked, and it gave you back things like that it thought you would like. And that's why I've always kind of wished that Apple would pick it up, and therefore give me better recommendations. Because even now, if I take some of the stations or channels or whatever that are supposed to be paying attention to what I like and listen to and feed me more, inevitably they will try to throw something that is current pop, rap, that kind of thing, throw it into the mix, and it's like, no, there's nothing anywhere near in my music library that is close to that.
So why you want to hear something from Drake appear in your feed someday?
Well, listen, nothing wrong with any of these artists, but that's just not my thing. To your point, like Pandora didn't suit you in the day. It's just it's that's not what I like. So I want to see this work. I want to see Pandora find some way to come back and be able to offer that same discoverability. And I realize if I sound a little hypocritical, because I could be paying for the service and still enjoying it. And there are only so many hours in the day, and as much as I love music, I don't always get to enjoy it as much as I would like. So I've always kind of hoped that they would figure out a way to do this, or license their technology, or sell it to somebody. And maybe this is it, but it just, of all the people, Sirius, I'm the first one to tell you, Mark, I never believed that satellite radio would go very far, especially after we got the online services letting us download music. I was completely wrong on that.
I think that's an undercovered area, and I think maybe if I think about it, if you look at the investor presentation that Sirius XM put together, they talk about all these cross marketing opportunities. Well, at least so. Being a observer of all sorts of acquisitions, At least I think that is positive. At least they weren't banking their hope on, by combining operations, we can eliminate, and improve efficiencies by, cutting wood and the other things. I think ultimately they're going to have to do that, but they weren't leading with that. At least they were leading with a positive product and service vision, which makes me think that this may break the normal sort of high-tech acquisition rule of, one struggling company plus another is less than zero. It's not two. It's generally one or less. So, and the reason I think there's something here is I don't know if I see any of them behind you, but it's smart speakers. So it's either, certainly in the short term, it's going to be anything with Alexa. Maybe longer term, maybe depending on how the HomePod ecosystem and APIs open up. But I think right now, this is an opportunity that if all you want to hear is Howard Stern, maybe this is a way to start to unbundle, some of their content a la carte. Because I think that's the reason that you're surprised at the sticking power of Sirius is they have some really dedicated fans who find value at $9 or $15 or $20 a month, for some of the different services as well as some of the unique content that's only available through their network.
Yeah, I know people that have it. They love it. Some are addicted to the various talk radio channels. Of course, Howard Stern deserves to be mentioned. They have so many channels of very narrowly focused programming, and if that particular narrow channel hits you, great. It's there. You've got it. And if you are driving cross country, or if you're a truck driver, or even if you're just doing long drives for business, it means that you're always going to be able to punch that on and you're going to get exactly what you want. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And trying to fit Pandora into that mold and figure out, okay, does that mean that they will have other channels, new channels, retire some and add some new based on a popular artist or a genre, if you will, or something like that, and then use Pandora's tech to seed that channel and let Pandora do its thing? I don't know. And the idea of them trying to unify the listening experience, broadcast versus or together with satellite, I'm not even sure I know exactly what that means, except that does Sirius XM want to become part broadcast?
So they are part broadcast right now in that they have some of their own proprietary content. One of the differentiations, just quickly studying their website between different service level, is Howard Stern available on a time shifted basis. So as you can listen to it anytime you want if you're at the top price tier, versus if you're not, you have to listen to it when it's broadcast. And I think the whole thing about podcasts, it's time shifted radio. Netflix is time shifted TV and movies. I think this is going to be a time shifted audio content, and in that regard, I mean, to me, it's a positive mental experience thinking through different services that could be offered. Will it be as good as my imagination? Maybe it's better, but that's a bet. Only time will tell. Let's meet in a year or two and see what happens. But as I say, I think that this has the potential to leverage, I think, what Pandora has historically been known for, plus coupling it with the ability that somebody says, "Oh, did you hear Howard Stern? His take on such and such." Okay, maybe this is a way that they could stream it out so that if you're listening to your HomePod, your Alexa device, they can inject ads, and they can inject premium ads, and create another monetary stream for the owners and the shareholders of Sirius XM. So again, here I think this has more in terms of potential upside to them in trying to expand their business, because unlike say video, where I think it's clear you have Netflix advantage Then you have, I don't know, maybe Amazon, maybe Hulu. I don't know who the number two in that space is. I'm sure if we had 5 people and we asked them who's number two, we'd get 12 different answers. I think I think audio, Apple, I think is acknowledged in many ways to have the lead in terms of, its music catalog and transactional sales. But Apple, you can't listen to everything everywhere. And I think if that's what their vision is when they mean to try to unify that experience, that I can listen to whatever content, on whatever device, I think that's a really powerful and seductive vision.
Doing a little hindsight looking, it's really intriguing the way that the music business has developed for streaming. And I'm not quite enough of a student to know who exactly got there first. Amazon certainly brought out their devices, which offered streaming music, and it still blows me away that they arguably had the lead in the streaming music space and never produced a high quality speaker, which now there are some high quality speakers finally, mainly through Sonos. Apple had a lot more of it locked down with the iPhone and iPad. They got there a little bit late with the HomePod, but they really focused on the quality of the audio. So for my money, they probably got to the whole experience and a superior experience first, with Amazon running a very close second. And honestly, I don't remember the release date of the Sonos One, so we might be able to argue that one.
Sonos One, I think was right around the year Drobo launched. So it would have been right around 2007. Maybe Sonos One was a year earlier, or maybe 2 years earlier.
But I'm talking about the Sonos that has the A-Lady built in.
Oh, the A-Lady. Oh, I think that was only like a year or 2 years ago.
Yeah, so it was right before or right after HomePod. I'm not quite sure which. And of course, Google. Now Google's throwing they're licensing everything, as Google would do, into everything. But they really didn't try to control the experience as much as some of the others. So it just intrigues me that we as music aficionados of some stripe, we want selection, and we want convenience, and we want quality, and we want to be able to listen to it everywhere. And only now, after all this time, are we finally getting some choices to do all those things.
Right. Well, implicit in what you're saying, there's 2 sides of the coin. One is the content to an extensive music library, and then the other is high fidelity playback devices. And for a long time, I think people were content just either with crappy MP3s and original iPod earbuds. I think Sonos, Sonos came out against that with a vision for we want high quality audio, as well as a number of others, including one of my favorites, Riva Audio, and then the Apple HomePod, that came out with a dedication to audio quality. But I think what we see here, say maybe with the Pandora deal with Sirius XM, it's all about the start of having music library. And somewhere in here, again, I think there's been a generational shift, right? Because Steve Jobs famously said people want to own their music. Well, I think that's true, but I think the millennial generation, their worldview, as I've learned by interviewing some of them, is no. Why should we waste all our money on songs and buying CDs when we only want one track and we only want one thing? Where for $10 a month or $20 a month, we can have everything, all the time. So, I think that's a tectonic shift in worldview. And it's something that if you were born and raised in the age of LPs or CDs, is a foreign concept. It's only been digitalization of music content and I think really the proliferation, over the past 10 years of smartphones, that we all have, this phenomenal, computer that does, all camera, music, health, even makes phones that's in our pockets. And I think these are some of the follow-on effects of that.
Yeah, I look back. I mean, the only way you could buy a single track before the digital age was a 45. And certainly that was not a great audio experience. And then the record companies...
You're talking about your parents now, right?
Grandparents.
Okay.
I'm not an artist. I'm not a music industry person. But the perception, I think, at least my perception, is that they try to seed a couple hits onto an album and then just take any other tracks that, the artist had recorded, throw them on, and just kept driving the prices up. And then we started to have the shall we call it, the music sharing services or options, which really, I think, tore things apart. And Apple and Steve Jobs came back and said, no, people don't want to steal the music. I mean, that's not why they're doing it. They're kind of doing it because they don't want what you're selling, or they want such a small percentage. And they found a way to bring it back. And obviously they were right, because, look what we have. iTunes was an amazing engine, and they switched over to streaming, and that's the way the world has gone. And whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, I too liked owning my music. But then when you started to look at the economics of it, it just makes sense. I mean, for what I might buy one album for, I could have a virtually unlimited library for that same amount per month. And the only thing is, of course, that you're hooked. It's a stream. You have to continue paying for it. Now, one other thing, at least, and I don't know if you've had this experience, so far in music, I have not had the experience of something that I put into my library and it disappears because of licensing changes. It's sort of the way things are happening on Netflix and Hulu, where things come and go because of the licensing. And that's where I think the music industry, or Apple, or whoever has negotiated that has done a really good job, because that makes me want to stick with the service instead of saying, gee, I want to watch Star Trek. And yeah, it used to be on Hulu, but gee, then now it's moved over to Netflix. So yeah. I cancel on Hulu, jump to Netflix, then it goes somewhere else. So I cancel that and move over there. And that's not the way to keep the audience.
Right. I think that's maybe why, somebody like Pandora, who has a large library, or Apple, has an ability to make this work, because these are not content creators, right? They're not like Reed Hastings over at Netflix, who's spending $6 billion or so this year on trying to create video content that people are going to want to see and binge watch. So I think the nature of the business is a little bit different. To your point, probably 90% of my music is stuff I've digitized versus purchased. So I don't believe I've had problems with music disappearing. Frankly, I think I probably had just more trouble and difficulty in managing playlists across generation of devices and things like that than I have in terms of music, disappearing. Although, there were some famous problems that Jim Dalrymple had, several years ago when the service, first got introduced, where music didn't play well with, your native iTunes library. But coming back to where we are now, I'm a Apple Music subscriber. I love the service. In the past couple of weeks, I've had a lot of fun, telling, hey, Siri, play the song with the lyrics and, XYZ or something. And, probably 90% of the time it nails exactly the song I want. So, that to me, that's like, the Shazam, the music profiling app. It just seems like that's just magic in terms of, how they must have, profiled and boiled down and created fast, searchable, indexable database in order to get that. So they've obviously built a very fast specialized search engine. But coming back to Pandora, I think, okay, play me song with the lyrics "I Did It My Way." Okay, well, now playing "I Did It My Way" by Frank Sinatra. That's Apple Siri will tell you that, but I think Sirius XM has a better ability that maybe you can find that and you don't pay for it, so they serve up an ad, so they get whatever fraction of revenue they get for serving up an ad, amplified by the fact if they can profile you over time, they can serve up a better, more relevant ad and serve up the ad at a higher revenue generating price for them as a company.
That's an interesting point, that you, by the very nature of using the Pandora service and tuning your radio station, because again, folks, if you don't use Pandora, if it suggests something on your station and you like it, then you give it a thumbs up, and if you don't, you give it a thumbs down. So I never really thought about the privacy implications of that. I'm not sure there are any real privacy implications of the fact that, I might like one kind of music over another or one artist over another or whatever, but you definitely were giving them that information that could have been very useful. And I don't know, maybe they didn't leverage it, or maybe that particular aspect of my personal information wasn't quite as marketable as some others.
But I think this is, again, I don't know where the line is between fact and my imagination, but I do know, informed by what my wife has told me, as she listens to, say, maybe different sort of music, because we just went through the World Cup, and she gets presented different sort of products that might appeal to somebody from Spain versus somebody from France or Italy or Brazil, just based on the type of music you're listening to. That it's pretty sensitive and pretty dynamic ad generation and ad serving mechanism that they have.
Yeah. We're doing a bit of second guessing here, or just speculating, but I think it's interesting, and especially because I think we're both music lovers of different kinds, and we're tech lovers, and the overlap of the two industries has been going on now for a long time and shows no signs of slowing down. So just have to wait and see what happens here, whether Pandora sticks with Sirius XM or whether another suitor comes calling, and if they do, if they do stick with Sirius, what Sirius does with them or how it integrates.
Well, let's create that imaginary buyers list. Who would it be? You already mentioned Apple, maybe Amazon, maybe Google. I doubt it's going to be Spotify. I think we talked 6 months ago. Spotify has its own challenges, and just like Pandora, it's returning losses to its owners. So it's although the stock price has gone up since we last spoke, it went public and started trading. The price went up. I still think that's a sucker's bet. That and now there's one less buyer in the marketplace for it. But again, that's just sort of my comment that if companies can't generate profits, they ultimately die or get acquired. So I think now it looks like Pandora has found a good home for some of its technology.
You said something there that triggered another thought. I have to wonder how much now. I mean, discoverability. We all talk about discoverability. Oh, let's find new music. And at the end of the day, that's what the industry wants you to do, because they want you to buy it or subscribe to it now, more likely, as opposed to giving me the choice of what I want to listen to. I mean, that was what convinced me to go with Apple Music. Pandora eventually got there, but they got there very, very late in the game, well after Apple Music and Spotify, and I think probably even some of the Google offerings. So at this point, is discoverability something that people really want?
I think it's something I think it's something they may not know that they're lacking. It's your archetypical Steve Jobs. People don't know what they want until we show it to them moment. Because I find that Apple Music, it's I sort of have a thing every Friday, Friday late afternoon, early evening. I look to see what its new recommendations are for me, and it's beyond bad. It just doesn't work. My dirty little secret is just YouTube. Offers up and prevents better discoverability to me than certainly Apple does, because just getting interested in the Canadian pianist Glenn Gould and exploring some of these things, and over time YouTube is serving up who knew he had all these recordings of some of the Beethoven sonata, or one or two Beethoven sonatas with Leonard Bernstein. Who knew that he has other performances, just Beethoven sonatas on his own. He's sort of famously known for sort of turning his back on live performance for the appeal of the ability to control and perfect a recording by performing in a recording studio. But there's a tremendous amount of his catalog that's out there that, search as I will on Apple, I can't find it, but it's up there on available on YouTube.
Now that is fascinating. But what I think I heard you say was the discoverability of more recordings by the given artist, not
Yes.
that here's Keith Emerson. I'm trying to think of great keyboardists, Keith Emerson or John Lord. Because you're listening to Glenn Gould, you might be interested in these. So is that an accurate perception?
Yes. So here they're sorting on your performer. So they're offering up more performance or more choice based on performer. But I've seen maybe, and I haven't really thought about it, so I don't know if I probably haven't, developed a memory of this way in terms of it sorting up, other things. I think it may have served up other things from a particular composer, but certainly stylistically, it's not doing it. So like the Musical Genome Project, where they say, oh, if you like this sort of technique, or the way this sort of music is composed, you might like these other composers or these other bands as a result. It's certainly not doing something like that.
Okay,
but more as with hits, it's measured by, oh, that's interesting, and I'll touch it and click, and I'll I'll watch and I'll listen. Some of them are just stuff that are historic recordings where somebody's just creating an animated series of still images that change every 10 or 30 seconds. So at least there's some sort of novel video content to get onto YouTube. It provides better discoverability. I was kind of hoping maybe. So as I say, it's been years since I've tried Pandora. I should go do an experiment with them now and try to do exactly the same thing. Try to see if I can focus in on recordings of Glenn Gould and see what it serves up as alternatives. Besides his two famous set of the Goldberg variations, which were made famous because that's what the prelude is, the thing Hannibal Lecter listens to in his cage in Silence of the Lambs.
I think we better end there. I'm afraid of where you're going next.
Oh, we can we can talk about Spotify a little bit if you want.
No, I think we'll save that. The Hannibal Lecter thing scares me a little. So, it'll be interesting. I mean, I feel like we should put a note in the calendar and check back in a few months and see what has developed here. I guess technically the deal is not supposed to close until sometime early 2019. Am I right? It was an all stock deal, no cash.
That's right, all stock. And they do have rights. There's no standstill agreements. They have rights so they can try to shop it around. And I don't expect they'll have other buyers. I expect it'll close, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So another dimension I think that's relevant here is the way music is monetized. The way royalties are paid. There's Um, there's a lot of agencies that all have acronyms. It's like the three-letter acronyms for defense and intelligence agencies. I think the bottom line result is that if you sell a track, or you play a track on radio, you get, as an artist, you get a much, much, much higher royalty than if you have a stream that's played. And I've heard numbers that it may be 15 streams or as many as 50 streams equals, a one play on radio. So the economics are completely different. And again, I don't understand the financials of each company. I don't know if there's an economic play here that, by being able to deliver things as streams, they can drive down their costs and hence boost profitability. That's something maybe Sirius XM could do, but certainly, I think it was a couple of years ago that I think not when Apple Music launched that they were saying, they're paying artists a higher rate than Pandora was. So therefore, that's support the artists and support Apple and get Apple Music. Is that familiar memories to you?
Yes, sort of. I remember that part, but I also remember Pandora fighting with the licensing companies because they were being expected to pay a much higher. I'm not going to get into royalties for the artist, but a much higher fee for streaming things than the terrestrial radios stations were. And there never as I recall, there was never a good resolution to the argument of why, but it was one of those things where Pandora had to pay it or shut down. And so they sucked it up, paid it, and, went on. And whether that's contributed to their current state, if I have that accurate, of course it would have to contribute to it. But it did make you wonder as an outsider, is this the record companies trying to, again, maintain control of the business that was so quickly slipping through their fingers?
Maybe, and maybe that's why there may be a hidden coupling on their income statement between top line revenue and something they categorize as a marketing cost in lieu of a cost of products sold. And this is one thing to be aware of when looking at companies go through distribution, is that no one wants to have, say, a horrible gross margin. Instead they'll have other marketing fees. So even though the net that you get from selling is apparently lower, instead of booking things as reduced sales, you book it as marketing expense, so that there's a kickback. So this is a way that companies that go through two-tier distribution can sort of financially engineer to make their business look better by having a better gross margin. No, they're just fat and inflated on sales and marketing, but it may not be. So I haven't certainly done a forensic analysis of their balance, of their income statement to see if there seems to be any implied couplings there or not, Chuck.
Yeah,
but that's an interesting memory. As I say, I knew that they had issues with what they were paying, but I don't recall it from that perspective that you just outlined.
Yeah, and I mean, again, some of that's history, because it may or may not be relevant or immediately relevant to what's going on now. But it does seem like Pandora fought the good fight, and they pioneered a lot of what happened to the music industry, and just maybe from a little different angle. And I want to see the technology that they've developed continue to be useful to folks. But I want to ask the audience too, folks. Stop by our Facebook page and find this link. We'd love to hear from you and let you know what you think about any of this. I mean, this has sort of been a wide-ranging discussion, not just of Pandora, but of music in general. Anything we said strike a chord with you? Sorry, pun not intended. Or are we just completely off base? Or you can just drop me an email at chuck@macvoices.com, and I will pass it on to Mark and see what one or both of us will respond to you, and we'd just love to know what you think. Mark,
I have two recommendations.
Please.
So they're two different podcasts. One you mentioned in passing is called The Next Track, hosted by Doug Adams and Kirk McElhearn. The podcast is past its 2-year mark, so that's significant because a lot of podcasts don't get that far. So I think they have a good show and good listenership. I know I look forward to it. It appears every Friday. It's generally timed to almost 30 to 31 minutes. So it's one of these things that has good content, good audio quality, and it's fixed size length, so you can build it into your schedule. And they talk about all, as you're saying, how people listen to music today. And they've talked at length about the problems of discoverability and sort of the evolving way that music has been served up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing I'd recommend, and this is one I remember specifically, that it talks about some of the economics and differences between purchase price, radio play, stream play. And it's a Bloomberg podcast called Masters in Business, hosted by a guy named Barry Ritholtz. And he has 2 interviews with guitarist Lawrence Juber. It's probably a name familiar to many in the audience here. Lawrence Juber has done a lot of work with Beatles and so on. And he talks about some of his experiences as well as his daughter's experience, in the music business, in terms of just how you make money, and just ability to play tunes is not enough. So those are fascinating discussions. So I'd recommend that, as well as I'd recommend subscribing to either one of those podcasts, and
thank you.
Kick some of your stale podcasts out, and rotate those into your podcast playlist.
But don't kick Mac Voices out.
No, of course not.
No, of course not.
It's new and fresh. You always have a new person to talk to.
Well, we try to make it interesting and bounce around topics a little bit, so we're not just rehashing the same thing over and over. But I'm putting a diary on this for 6 months, and we'll come back, and if there have been developments, we'll come back and talk about them and see what some of the listeners think and take it from there. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. As always, I appreciate the insight. You come at it from a completely different angle than I do, and it's fun to share the information. This was a very good discussion. I hope the listeners enjoy it, and look forward to hearing maybe some dialogue continue through the Twitter sphere. Agreed. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. We'll be back with more soon. You never know what you're going to find here. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Mac Voices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple Tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep Mac Voices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.